welcome to episode 124 of Coffee and Co-Read, your source for all things literary with Kristen
and Catherine, where we believe there's nothing better than a hot coffee and an awesome book. Join us for our virtual book club, where we take one book a month and dive into all of the drama, adventure, and romance we can find. Hey, Kristen.
Hi, Catherine.
So, we figured today we'd talk a bit about the prequel to this series, Assassin's Blade. I think we may have already touched on it a few times, and as it comes up, we do bring it up. But there's definitely some mentions of it in these two books that you really, I think, should read Assassin's Blade before you get to these ones for sure.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll start with, what order do you think it's best to read it in?
So I've seen a lot of contention on what order it should be read in online. A whole bunch of people on Facebook and other social media, they always ask the question, I'm starting Throne of Glass series, should I start with Assassin's Blade or should I start with Throne of Glass? Mm-hmm. And so many people recommend reading Assassin's Blade first. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's just the way that we read the series. Like, maybe it's just a nostalgia thing. But, like, I do not agree with that.
Yeah.
At all. So, like, if you have not read it, Assassin's Blade is the prequel to Throne of Glass. It follows the story. It's a bunch of little mini stories about Selena Sardathian and her life as an assassin. So it follows her as she goes on missions, we'll say. Mm-hmm. So I do not think that. So, like, it's just a novella, right? It's like maybe 100 pages soaking wet. It's not a it's not a big long book or anything like that. So you could get it done relatively quickly. And I don't know. There's just something about meeting Selena broken and, like, but still defiant, and, like, her meeting Chaol for the first time, her meeting Dorian for the first time, and, like, seeing her heartbreak. Mm-hmm. Like, there's just something to that.
Yeah.
And, like, and I've said this a million times before, I love happily ever afters. I like knowing what's going to happen. If it's going to be a sad ending, I need to know about it. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of the reason why I personally wouldn't want to read Assassin's Blade first, because you get attached to, so we're at, I'm hesitant about spoilers at this point, but, like, we're at Empire of Storms. So, like, Sam, who Selena was in love with, and, like, Selena was her person, and he died pre-Throne of Glass. Mm-hmm. But he was dead. As when we read Throne of Glass, he was dead.
Yeah,
right?
She even says it to Dorian.
Yes.
Like, we're aware that was in her past, but we just know.
So, in Assassin's Blade, he is alive. Mm-hmm. So, he exists. I, personally, wouldn't want to read that book. Start with the novella, knowing what you know. Like... Yeah. And thinking, oh, well, you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't want to go into Assassin's Blade knowing nothing, getting attached to Sam, getting attached to some other people, and then everybody dying.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And her being sent off to, like, a slave. Yeah, a slave camp. Like, it's a very unhappy ending of a book.
Yeah, it's dark. And, like, I feel like you're not getting a full grasp of the realm. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I just feel like, why would you want to start with a prequel? Like, it's not intended, like, she didn't publish Assassin's Blade until after Throne of Glass. Yeah. I think she published it, didn't she publish it after Heir of Fire?
I'm not sure. Because I think she did write them before, but they were maybe online.
Okay.
As separate stories, and then she published them in it, like, bound together.
Right.
But it does seem like she wrote Throne of Glass, because that was also an online thing. She wrote Throne of Glass, and then she was like, I'm going to write a few stories about before. And now, I bet they probably flow better now, because, like, you're reading it, it doesn't really feel like little stories. It just feels like it could be a time jump. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I do think, like, it's edited, I guess, well now when she published them all together. But I think that she wrote them after she either, like, based on how they're written, I think Throne of Glass was first and then that. But, like, I don't know for sure, because I think most of it was done kind of online, and then the actual publishing was different.
Right. But anyway, like, it just... I get annoyed, but that's just me, because people are saying, you know, if you want maximum feels, to read Assassin's Blade first, which I understand, you know, like, if you don't want spoilers, that's what people are saying. If you don't want any spoilers, read Assassin's Blade first. I don't consider Sam's death really a spoiler.
Yeah. I feel the same way. Like, I don't think it's a spoiler, because it's like, I just think it helps round out the characters. It really feels like something that happened, like, that she wrote afterwards to explain some things. And, like,
yes.
I definitely like it. And like I said, stuff is coming up in these books about it. So, like, the connections I really love, and you definitely need to read it, but I also would read it third or fourth, I guess.
After Heir of Fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you're getting someone new into it, like, my niece started with Assassin's Blade because she liked the title.
Okay.
She was like, can I read this one? And I was like, I guess. I was like, you can't read, like, whatever. She liked the title. She wanted to read it. I said, sure. So she got through maybe 3/4 of it and was like, I'm not feeling it. It's harder, I think, to connect to the main character, Selena, in Assassin's Blade, because she hasn't gone through any terrible shit yet. Like,
well,
but, like, she's so...
She's at the height of her career at this point.
Yeah, and she's so, like, swagger, and she's cocky, and she has some personality traits that you're like, but you're a 15-year-old, like, fuck off.
Yeah.
As an adult reading it, you're like, seriously? But, like, if you see where she is at the beginning of Throne of Glass, and then you go back, you're like, oh, I understand.
Yeah.
I just don't think you can empathize with her as much reading Assassin's Blade first.
Yeah. I agree.
But yeah. So, whenever I do read it after Heir of Fire.
Yeah. And, like...
Which is right when you don't really want to read it.
No, but then at the same time, think about it too. So, like, throughout this tandem read, we're going to be highlighting, this is a reference to Assassin's Blade. This is a reference to Assassin's Blade. Like, we discussed that, right? So, like, that didn't happen. Like, I think there might have been one vague sort of reference in Heir of Fire.
Yeah.
And, like, maybe one or two in Queen of Shadows. But, like, this book has a shit ton.
Yeah.
So, like, why would you read it first? Depending on how fast of a reader you are. Like, this is a long series.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it is hefty. It is 7 books plus this novella. And they're long books, 500 pages apiece. If you are not a fast reader, or if you need, like, say, a cleanser, like a cleanser book in between, or, you know, if you don't have that much time to read and you can't get through a series really fast, like, theoretically, you could be reading this series for months.
Yeah.
So why would you put the book that has all these references, like, Empire of Storms has the most references in it, why would you read Assassin's Blade first, and then potentially, like, 4, 5, 6 months down the road, read the book with all the references in it? You've probably forgotten Assassin's Blade by then.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're better off reading it closer to in the middle of the series so that everything is fresh in your mind.
Yeah. That makes sense too, yeah.
Anyway, it's the hill that I'll die on.
And I think originally Sarah J. Maas came out and said that this is the order you should read it in. But she has since said you should start with Assassin's Blade.
No. It was the opposite.
Oh, the opposite?
Yeah, so first she came out and said to read it in chronological order.
Oh, okay.
But now on her website, if you were to go look, I think she puts Assassin's Blade as third. She's redacted and said, no, read Throne of Glass first.
So she puts it after Crown of Midnight?
I can't remember if it's Crown of Midnight or Air of Fire. I think from what I've read, it says third, which might be after Queen of Shadows. Okay. Or not, no, sorry, my bad. After Crown of Midnight.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess Jeff also read them, and I started him on Throne of Glass because the story's good, and, like, I know people say it's slow and shit, but, like, I find Assassin's Blade is even harder. Like, if you're trying to get somebody in the series, I don't think Assassin's Blade is the good starting point.
Yeah.
But I think if you did Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, Assassin's Blade, then you've got, like, 3 books that are kind of like, in the beginning. If you get them hooked in with Air of Fire, because that's when it really picks up.
Yes.
And then you're like, here's a curveball, read this, before you're allowed to continue the rest of the story. I think it's just a good, like, you're invested and you're raring to go, and then you read this book and the heartbreak and everything, and you get it. And then you go back to Queen of Shadows, and I just think it's a good journey to go on, and it takes away any of the potential boringness that some people find with the first 2 books in the prequel, which, like, I don't really find it with Throne of Glass or Crown of Midnight. Crown of Midnight, we were kind of like, what even happened?
Yes, yeah.
But that's
still to this day, what even happened?
But yeah, I still liked both of the books, and, like, when I thought Throne of Glass was the only book in the series, I loved it.
Yes, me too. And I'm actually quite surprised because some people, when they talk about reading order, I actually did read some comments of people saying that they tried to read Throne of Glass first and couldn't connect with the character. And I thought that was surprising because I'm like, I really, like, you feel for her. The poor girl's been, like, talks about how she, like, tried to go over the wall and, like, killed all these people and, like, didn't expect to survive it. Like, she wanted to die. Like, how do you not connect with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I get people are going in having read all of Sarah J. Maas's other stuff, and they're like, this is not what I was expecting. But luckily for me, that was the first book by her I read, and
No, it's not.
Attached to it.
Is it?
Throne of Glass.
I thought, you're right. We did.
Yep.
Sorry, my bad. My fault.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, I immediately latched on and was like, love this, perfect.
Yeah, me too. Oh my god, you don't know how excited I was when I finished Throne of Glass and looked and saw that she had more.
Yeah.
I was stoked. But I feel like there was definitely only 3 books max out of Throne of Glass. Like, it might have been out up to Air of Fire.
Yeah.
And then only ACOTAR was out.
Yeah.
But I think Akamath was, like, gonna be out soon.
Yeah.
But, like, now it's a lifestyle.
Yeah, really, though. It's wild.
Anyway, we've spent a lot of time on this, but we had a lot to say about it. Yeah. So we're gonna get into it now. Just a heads up, this is not a spoiler-free zone, and things might get saucy. They won't today. But they might. So this is week 2 of our tandem read of Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn by Sarah J. Maas. This week we are reading Tower of Dawn chapters 4 to 10 and Empire of Storms chapter 11 to 16. So last week, we sort of just got a little, like, placeholder of where everyone was. So, like, Aelin and crew went to Terrassen to try and reclaim her throne, and they were denied. So, Rowan went off to save Dorian. Aelin, Aedion, and Lysandra were heading to Skulls Bay. I'm trying to think. Dorian is in his castle, gets attacked by witches and wyverns, and has to escape. Elide meets Fae dude Lorcan, and they sort of form a partnership to get out of some sticky situations. And then on the... Manon is sort of, like, chafing, I feel like, at the leadership bit. Like, she's not taking the submissive role very well.
No.
And then we go over to Chaol and Nesrin, and they're just settling into their new sort of not permanent, but their temporary life in the southern continent, trying to get Chaol healed. I feel like is that everyone?
I think so.
It's so hard. There's so many of them.
There are so many. This is the wild with 2 books.
Yeah. So we're starting today with Tower of Dawn chapters 4 to 6. So, Tower of Dawn chapters 4 to 6, we start off with a new character alert. Meh, 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 meh. So we didn't have enough.
Yeah.
We didn't have enough. We have a new one. Her name confuses me because you said it's Yrene, right?
Yeah.
But it's spelled with a Y at the beginning, so whenever I read it, my brain tells me Yrene.
No.
So I get it. I might, like, same thing, with the whole, like, Hermione thing when I was a kid. I might slip up and say Yrene, even though it's Yrene, according to the audiobooks. So, yeah. I apologize in advance if I say Yrene. It's just how my brain has been reading it forever. So, Yrene is our new character. So, she is a healer. And she lives and works in the Torre Cesme. Is that right too?
I think it's Torre Cesme. But
Torre Cesme.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's gonna be what it's gonna be because some of these words are
hard. Words are hard.
They are.
So she has been living and working in the Torre Cesme for 2 years. And sort of the very first thought we get from her is that it's the first place she has felt safe in 10 years. So she's been through shit.
Yeah. Sorry. It's been half a second since I read Assassin's Blade, and I'm probably going to read it again. But do we get her name in Assassin's Blade? So we immediately, if you've read Assassin's Blade, know.
Yes, she had a story, yes. And
yeah, okay.
And they almost she kind of repeats it to death, and I'll highlight it when it happens. Her sort of involvement in Assassin's Blade. But we get it, like, it's like, okay, we get it.
Yeah.
So apparently she's worked her butt off to be the top of her class in healing. But she has also, like, not only working her butt off to study, but also just she has a significant healing magic. Like, she's significantly gifted in healing magic. And then she mentions how a stranger gave her a gift in Inish 2 years ago. So there's our Easter egg for Assassin's Blade. We'll find out that the stranger is obviously Selena Sardathian, aka Aelin. Sort of did her a favor a couple of years ago, which helped her get here. And she repeats it over and over and over again. Yeah. And I'll point it out whenever it happens. So she is meeting with the healer on high, or the healer on high, who is sort of the ruler of the Torre Cesme. And her name is Hafiza. And they're discussing an idea that Yrene would leave. She's ready to go. Like, she just passed her exams. She's considered like a full-fledged healer now. And she wants to leave and go back to her country to help in the war. And Hafiza sort of like implies that she wants her to stay. And then we learn that Yrene's country is Fenharrow. So it's one of those it's a smaller country. I think if I'm thinking of the map correctly, I know. It is in between EoS and Aelin. And then Terrassen is above Aelin.
It's also where Sorsha was from, right?
I think so. And it would make sense. I think Fenharrow was sort of known as like the healer capital of the world.
Yeah, it's above EoS, next to Melisande.
Yes.
Below Aelin.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm telling you. Anyway, so she wants to go back and help her people. Mm-hmm. And then she sort of remembers, like, we sort of get a little glimpse that Adelenian soldiers came to her home when she was little, and burned her mother at the stake, kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And she hid in the woods and watched. But, like, her mother sort of saved her.
Yeah.
And, like, stayed behind so that she could escape. So, again, like I said, she had taken her exams, so she's completed her studies officially, but Hafiza wants her to stay and learn more. Like, sort of like, you know, you're always learning. Just because you've passed the exams doesn't mean you know everything. You should stay. Mm-hmm. But we also get that, like, her mother and generations before her mother, like, the women in her family, had all been healers. Mm-hmm. So, like, she already knew some things because she had been training with her mother since she was a small child. And I think her mother died when she was about 11. So she was already decently proficient in healing before she showed up at the Torre. So she sort of was already ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like she just has more magic than most.
Yeah. Yeah, she's got a gift.
Yeah.
So Hafiza then asks her about Prince Cashin. So we met Prince Cashin last week. He is one of the Kagan's children. The one that controls the land armies, and the one that is already sort of confided in Chaol that he doesn't believe his sister's death was suicide, and you know, wants him to sort of stick around and watch and see what's up. So, like, a decent choice for an ally, we'll say. Like, sort of the first hand that is sort of offered them, like, friendship, maybe I'll say?
Yeah.
An alliance, like...
Yeah.
Information a little bit. Anyway. Mm-hmm. So, like, Hafiza just brings that up, and Yrene's... See, look, there I go. Yrene's like, what are you talking about? And she was like, well, you and Prince Cashin were friends, like, and sort of implies that it was, like, romantic friends?
Yeah.
And then, like, this is just all backstory for Yrene at this point, and they're trying to update us on her place in this world, so we're getting a lot of information hard and fast. So she thinks about how she met Cashin while healing his servant, but she also met Hassar, who is the third oldest sister and the one who leads the armadas. So she had to heal her for something too. And, like, they all became really close friends. Like, they were sort of a group. And that included Hassar's partner, Renya. So Hafiza had taken her to the steppes, which is like where the horse tribes live. It's sort of like out in the wilderness, we'll say. And Cashin escorted them because, again, that's sort of his jam. That's like his people.
Domain.
Yeah.
Each of the princes and princesses kind of has like a thing.
Mm-hmm. So he escorted them, and like he must have. This is my inference, but like he must have like declared himself or like told her he loved her or something like that, because she like turned him down and has been avoiding him ever since. Yeah. And like I don't know how recent this was. It cannot have been that long ago.
Doesn't seem like it.
So even though like Hafiza is trying to convince Yrene to stay and sort of like trying to guilt her a little bit, like, what about your friends? What about me? Sort of a thing. Yrene is still like determined to leave. She's like, no, I need to go back home. I need to go back to my country and I need to help.
Yeah, she's like, it's the right thing to do.
Yes.
She's very on that path.
Yeah. So like Yrene is like ready to leave like tomorrow, right? But Hafiza's like, before you leave, there's a special guest of the Kagan. You know, she explained the injury, that it was like a spinal injury and he can't walk and blah, blah, blah. And Yrene had actually healed something like that before. So that's why she's being asked, Hafiza's asking her, like, I know you've healed this type of injury before. It would be really helpful if you could take a look at this special guest of the king. Mm-hmm. Or the Kagan, sorry. And she knows in her head, like, that it's sort of injury, that treatment could take like a month. Like the last time she healed that injury, that was like a month-long treatment. But Hafiza then tells her that it's Lord Chaol Westfall, right hand to King Dorian of Aelin, and Yrene flat out says no.
Which I love.
I also love. She said she refuses to heal someone who served the former king, but Hafiza tries to reason with her that, like, they're healers. It's their job. Like, their job as healers, and sort of like how doctors sort of take the Hippocratic Oath today, sort of like, it's not your job to pass judgment on someone. You know, you're a healer, so you need to heal everybody.
Yeah.
And she even mentions that, like, she once had to heal a criminal who had, like, killed a bunch of people. He was going on trial, and, like, but he was sick, so Hafiza had to go in and heal him. And she was so furious, like, she wanted to kill him herself, but she reminded herself that she took an oath, and it wasn't her death to give. Mm-hmm. So, of course, after the trial, this criminal was executed. I don't think it ever comes up again, but it was just sort of an example of, I understand you're angry, I too have been there, however, we're healers, it's our job to heal, no matter who it is.
Yeah.
And Yrene sort of thinks that the moral of the story is that if she heals him, he can therefore go on to get justice, like this criminal, like, she healed him, and then he went to trial the next day and was found guilty, and then they executed him. So she's like, oh, so you're saying if I heal him, then he'll meet he'll, like, get his, like, sort of karma.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is kind of funny, because that's kind of what the healing process does with both of them. Like, he kind of does have to face everything that he
has done,
ignored or has done. Yeah. So, like, she is right, but she's kind of taking the wrong lesson that she's, like, Hafiza's not trying to teach her that lesson. That's not what she's saying.
Yeah.
She's learning the wrong lesson, but then all in all, she's right. It reminds me of Psych when Sean's always like, I got it. And he's like, his dad's like, no, you're learning the wrong thing. Stop.
Yeah. But that's funny because, so, like, Hafiza says, like, I want you to listen to his story. Like, it might be different than you think. Like, you don't know his story.
Yeah.
So Hafiza also let Yrene know that she hoped Yrene would actually take over as the healer on high one day. So this is sort of like a bomb. Like, hey, you want to leave, but I want to name you my successor.
Yeah.
And, like, she says, like, you need to do this healing because you also need to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you're not so bitter about Aderlin.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, fair point, man. Watching your mother be murdered by a country's soldiers, I'd be bitter too.
Of course, yeah. You like nobody can really blame her for feeling that way.
No. Anyway, so Yrene has this note in her pocket that she holds for comfort. And again, another Assassin's Blade reference. This is a letter that Selena wrote her. And Selena also gave her a bag of gold and, like, gold and jewels in order to help her make passage to the Torre Cesme when she was working at an inn in this town called Inish, which is like a coastal, sort of like a port town.
Yeah, it's just funny. It's called Inish, and she was working at an inn.
Yeah. But anyway, so, like, she didn't know, obviously, who Selena was.
Mm-hmm.
But Selena helped her that way by giving her this money to help her get across to the southern continent. She also gave her, like, a brooch in Aderlinian colors, and she says that, like, that's one thing she would never sell. And the note says, for wherever you need to go and then some, the world needs more healers. So, like, this note is sort of like her comfort object. Like, she keeps it in her pocket all the time, and she grabs it for comfort to sort of steady herself.
And it's really telling, too, if you have read Assassin's Blade, and possibly even Throne of Glass, because originally, Aelin wanted to be a healer herself.
Yeah.
Like, even though that never would have been a possibility. Obviously, she's, like, gonna be queen, you can't. But, you know, people want to be things when they're kids.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, wasn't there talk of her, from Aelin herself, when she was a kid, that, like, she was trying to get permission from her parents to go to, I think she wanted to go to a healer's school, or...
I think they mentioned the Torre Cesme by name.
Did they? I don't remember.
I think they might have.
I don't remember if it was
her mother was like, she can't go to Wendelin.
Yes.
Because she didn't want her. So, like, the only actual option would have been the Torre Cesme.
But I thought that's for human healers, is it not?
I don't know.
I feel like that's...
Because they obviously still have magic.
Yeah, but humans, I don't think Fae, there's no Fae there.
I don't know.
And I don't know if, we know Aelin is Fae, but, like, she has a human form, so, like, does she count? Anyway, we're going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, it doesn't actually matter because she never does become a healer herself.
No. So, she just sort of knows that she'll regret it, and she'll disappoint Hafiza, and she doesn't really want to do that if she doesn't agree to heal him. So, she agrees to go and assess him.
Mm-hmm.
And then she'll decide if she's going to heal him. She wants to meet him and see what's up. So, we now jump to Chaol's point of view. Him and Nesrin are waiting for the healer. They were told the healer would come in the morning, so they're waiting. We get sort of a flashback that last night's dinner was sort of uncomfortable. Because Argan, who is the oldest son of the Kagan, asked him why the former king was an ass and enslaved his people, only to kill them. He didn't use those exact words, I'm paraphrasing, but we're all thinking it. And, like,
yeah,
but, like, rightfully so.
Shit.
But is this is not a piece of shit thing to do.
No, but he is a piece of shit in this book.
Of course he is.
and he just annoys me. Like, also, it's not really supper talk.
But, like, you have these guests that arrive in the midst of grieving time for you and your family, expect to be put up, want to talk about you sending all of your forces over to help them, and you're like, dude, your king was an ass. You know what I mean? So, like, I get at this moment, I get why he's...
Well, it's also because, like, obviously they have had a history of slavery, and they're like, it didn't work, we realized it.
Yeah.
And still, you guys did it, and you knew it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But, like, I do get it, but I'm also like, I don't know, I think it's so dumb that Chaol was... whatever his title was in the first book, the captain of the guard. Like, he was a child.
Yeah.
Like,
but
I just think it was dumb he had that title.
But I think we can safely say that the reason he had that title was on purpose. Like the, the king, Dorian's dad, purposely gave him that title because he knew he would overlook things and look past things because he's a child.
Yeah. I think that the book was written by a young Sarah J. Maas, and she chose it, and then now she's kind of in over her head. And that's where, like, I know there are some things that happen in the first book that are, like, Easter eggs and shit, but, like, I think this is one of the things that just didn't really make sense. And she's just like, now I have to live with it.
Maybe. Anyway, so Argan's sort of, like, making Chaol uncomfortable by asking him the uncomfortable questions about, like, why was your king such an ass? Otherwise, dinner was fine. Duva, the second youngest, who's preggo, her husband was there, and, like, it seems like they love each other. He doesn't really speak, though, because he doesn't speak the language.
Yeah.
Nezrin wasn't really herself. Like, I guess they had just found out that, Aderlin was Rifthold was sacked, and she's worried about her family, so she's sort of preoccupied.
Yeah.
And when they went back to their room after supper, she, like, barely talked to Chaol, and then he was like, do you want to share my room? And she just, like, sort of eye-rolled at him and, like, went to her room and slammed the door. And it's like, dude, not the time.
I know, but I'm also like, if you're in a relationship with somebody, you're not going to sleep in separate beds. It is odd.
But, like, they have not yet established their relationship. They were fuck buddies. Then she was like, please don't die. And he was like, okay. And that's the extent of their relationship.
Yeah, no, but they were kind of like, before she was like, please don't die because I want to see where this will go. And then after he was injured, he was like, hey, I don't hold you to actually wanting to see where this relationship goes because clearly you don't want to be with me now. And she was like, that's not true. So, like, they did kind of establish that they want to try a relationship.
But, like, I don't think that them trying a relationship means that they have to share a room. They haven't established that as their norm.
No, but it definitely means communication.
Which they're both terrible at.
Yeah, but they're just... I don't know. I just think that if you are going to try a relationship with somebody, they're not doing it well. And, like, maybe that's the point... Maybe, like, she wrote this book and she was like, I'm going to make it so that nobody...
Roots for them
as a couple so that nobody feels like either of them cheated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I expected that, like, I don't know. I get that they're both in their trauma and in their feels right now, but I was just like, this is odd. And clearly it's doomed if they can't have a conversation.
I don't know.
Did they not talk for 3 weeks on the sea? Like
they did, but apparently anytime she tried to get physical, he was like, he sort of pushed her away because of his trauma and, like, thinking like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So, I just think it was poor timing on his part. You know what? He can obviously see that she's distraught and upset, and being like, hey, want to share my bed? It's sort of a little dude, let her, give her space for a bit.
I know, but I don't think he means it in a sexual way. I don't think, he's looking to have sex with her.
I don't either.
I think he's looking to comfort her. Because she is upset.
But I feel like, I don't know. I don't think I don't know.
I just think that, she doesn't want comfort like that.
No.
But he thinks that she does.
Yes.
And it just comes back to communication.
Yeah. Agreed.
But yeah, it's, obvious that they're not communicating and this relationship is doomed.
Yeah. Anyway, so sort of back to them waiting, this whole sort of chapter section starts with them waiting for the healer. So now we're back to that. Mm-hmm. And Yrene comes in and sees him, and she's just pissed at the sight of him. Mm-hmm. And, she goes to take information from him. So, she sits down with a piece of paper and asks him, name, age, and, is asking all of this stuff. And obviously she thinks he's beautiful, but, she's still really, short, to the point, and, sort of, angry.
Yeah.
And point to him, he recognizes that her accent is from Fenharrow, and he immediately understands why she's pissed. He gets it immediately. Oh, she's from Fenharrow? Shit, Aelin were dicks to them.
Yeah.
He offers to, send for someone else if she doesn't want to heal him. But she just tells him, there is no one else. It's me or no one. So,
fair.
So, Hussar then comes in, I guess, knowing that she's there, and is friendly with Yrene, and tells her that Cashin is sulking because she didn't come to dinner or something, or she didn't come visit them or some sort of a thing, but he's sulking. And that
sounds like a him problem.
It does sound like a him problem. But that it's just sort of reinforcing this, Cashin is in love with her storyline. Mm-hmm. Then we go to Irene's point of view again. She sort of feels bad for treating him so rudely, but at the same time, she hates that, he has hope in his eyes when he looks at her. Mm-hmm. So she was so angry that when she was asking him for his information, she wasn't actually writing down his information. She was listing the last 4 generations of Towers women. Towers is her last name. And she wrote her mother's name down over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So she's just pissed.
Yeah. Rightfully so.
Yeah. And she could tell that Chaol was a soldier. She could tell by his muscles, and he's handsome enough, and that sort of surprised her. And she could also tell that there was some sort of romantic attachment between him and Nesrin. She could see that. So after she met with them, she goes back to the Torre and goes to Hafiza's office and tells her what happened, that she was rude, but that the injury seems like it's almost identical to the one she healed on the steps. And that she said, actually took 2 months to heal. So she thinks she's confident that she can make him walk again. And she tells Hafiza that she will heal him. It's the right thing to do. And she thinks to herself about how, the things done to Fenharrow were not really his fault. He was a child. The same as her.
Yeah.
So, she's trying her best to look past it. He was a child. It's not actually his fault. So she needs to try to sort of not get over it, but not put all the blame on him. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she also tells Hafiza that she actually inspected the wound, and Chaol told her it was done with foul magic. He didn't go into detail that it was done with, like, valg magic. And Yrene felt the wound and said it was rotted, yet empty and cold, and unlike any magic she'd ever felt before. So she's going to have to contend with that, and that's something new.
Interesting.
So now we go to Nesrin's point of view. She hadn't slept well the night before. She could barely eat. All she could think about was her family. She wanted to go visit her aunt, uncle, and cousins to see if maybe they heard word from her family. And Chaol told her to go. He was like, I understand that you are, like, that you want to know, you need to know, so, like, go ahead, I'm fine here, you don't have to worry about me, sort of a thing. And it's sort of like, he's sort of opening up at that moment to be like, it's okay, I understand, like, because she wants to go visit them, but at the same time, she's like, oh, I probably shouldn't leave him here. Mm-hmm. And he's like, no, it's fine. But then she says, we should ask the healer about completion. In other words, we should ask the healer if you're good to have sex.
Yeah. And
that sort of shuts him right down. Because he doesn't want to admit anything about his injury. He feels less than for being injured. And it's a reoccurring theme. He's always looking at the guards in the Kagan's palace and being like, look at how they're doing their job. That used to be me. And, like, now he's very, self-conscious isn't really the word, but, like, he hates what his disability has, and I say disability, like, in the broadest of terms, but, like, he hates what this injury has done to him. He feels like he's no longer a man, like,
yeah. And it kind of comes up a bit later in my part too. Like, there's so much trauma around this that it's not even just the physical trauma. He has so much emotional, mental trauma on the go right now that he's just like, he's too fucked up, for lack of a better term, in the head to actually, like we kind of said earlier, he wasn't asking her to sleep with him for sex. That's not what he wants. Like, he's not interested in that right now.
Yeah. But, so this is the thing. So, like, apparently she tried to, I'm saying she jumped him when they were on the boat. Like, she tried to initiate sex. But he stopped her. And my question is it because he can't? Or is he worried he won't be good without any legs? Like, without the use of his legs? Like, we don't know at this point what his holdup is. Maybe he's just got a mental block. Maybe he's just not into sex right now, like you were saying. Like, we don't actually know what's going on. But, like, she wanted him and he turned her down, is essentially what happened. So she leaves to go visit her family and runs into Prince Sartak, who is the second oldest brother. He's the one that trains the sparrows. AKA the gigantic eagle rook riders. So he tells her he's going for a ride on his rook, but asks, like, she says, I'm going to visit my family. And he's like, shall I escort you into town and to their house? But she's like, no, that's fine, I can manage. But he does,
and you're like, you need to say yes. You're trying to get in with these people.
Exactly.
Why would you not say yes?
Yeah. But he does escort her. He's like, let me at least bring you to the gates of the palace to introduce you to the guards so that they know your face, so that you can come and go. Which is smart. Actually.
Yes.
And they make small talk about a few things on their way, like talk about Chaol's injury, talk about Yrene a little bit, and how he became a rook rider. And then we sort of get his backstory that when he was 12, he stole the captain of the rooks. He stole his rook and rode it. And then his father sentenced him to live with the rook riders until he gained some sense. And he grew to love it.
Which was just like his whole life. He's still there. Like, his father was like, you live here now, goodbye.
Yeah, so essentially he was like, okay, fine. So now he loves it. And he actually hatched his rook, whose name is Kadara, when he was 15 himself. And they've been besties ever since. And Nesrin feels guilty that they're going to ask them to fly into war with their rooks against wyverns. Because, like, she knows how fierce wyverns are. She hasn't seen the rooks or anything like that, but she feels bad. She thinks that, like, the wyverns are essentially, like, unbeatable. You know what I mean? Like, she has them built up in her brain as being, like, these crazy, impossible to defeat beasts. And she's gonna ask these sparrows to head into battle against them. It's like Sparrow versus Dragon.
Yeah. Like, they're not sparrows, but...
I know they're not, but I can't help but that's my brain. That's what they are.
Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, it's legends that she's been hearing about since she was a child, too, and she, like, cares about them. Mm-hmm. So she's like, yeah, she does feel bad.
He actually offers her a ride on his rook one day. And
magic carpet ride.
Yes,
anybody?
yes. But the way he says it sort of implies to her that they can speak freely in the air because there's no eavesdroppers. Like, this palace is wild for don't say anything. There's always people spying. There's always people listening. Like, even if you're in, even if you're in a room by yourself, they're like, don't say anything. So he sort of implies, like, you know, if we're in the air, nobody could hear us talk, so they can sort of speak freely. So she's like, yeah, sure, I'd love to go for a ride with you. Now we go back to Empire of Storms, chapter 11. So we are following up with Manon. So this is coming right on the heels of her taking possession of Rifthold. She killed that witch and was present when Rowan killed the other 4 witches. And so now she's angry, but she's also nervous because Iskra was pissed at her for sort of taking over.
She fucked up. Like, she really shouldn't have killed that witch. She should have let the witch kill Dorian. Like, that's what she should have done.
Yeah, but she just acted on instinct.
Mm-hmm.
So 5 of Iskra's witches, so again, that 1 sentinel and plus the 4 that Rowan killed, are sort of dead because of her. Either by her hand or her inaction. So Iskra had obviously been pissed that Manon came in and took command. And she said, like, this was my sort of, what's it called? This was her
victory.
Yeah, this was my victory. And while they were perched on the roof of the castle, Iskra actually scented the smell of dead witch on Manon and knew that she killed one of her witches. So, Manon's story is that she had to, like, invent something, that as they were closing in on Dorian, the witch attacked her, trying to take her prize, so she killed her. And while she did, Dorian got away.
Mm-hmm.
So, and essentially, like, the truth that she was fighting this witch, Rowan killed the other 4, and rescued Dorian, and that's how he got away.
Which is, like, you'd think that Rowan wouldn't have let her live if that were the truth. Like, I'm surprised that people aren't like, why did he let you live then?
But, like, nobody knows that happened in the same room.
Yeah, I guess.
Right?
Just vague enough that you don't know.
So now they're at Morath. All the matrons are there, the 3 matrons. And it sort of seems like a hearing, like, on Manon's behavior. So Petra is there, who is the blue blood heir. And Manon hasn't actually seen her since the War Games when her mount died. That happened in Heir of Fire? Or Queen of Shadows? Queen of Shadows,
I think.
Anyway, so her mount died and her face was like pale and sunken in. And there's a rumor that after her mount, Keely, died, she didn't get out of bed for weeks. Which is weird because witches don't mourn because witches don't love.
They don't feel.
They don't feel. So it's weird that she's mourning. So she quickly sort of, before they step foot in the hall, she makes Astrid and Sorrel promise her that if things go badly, to get the 13 out. Because if she ends up being, like, put to death, like, if they end up executing her, she thinks that without her as the leader of the 13, a lot of people will come seeking vengeance for things. So they gotta get away for their safety. So she approaches the matrons, and the matrons explain that because Manon killed a sentinel of Iskra's, it's a crime against Iskra. And they ask what happened. They want to know. And Manon sort of accuses Iskra of spouting lies to earn the title of wing leader, which everybody knows that she's coveting that title. And then Petra asks to speak up. And she asks Manon, why did she save her life that day? Because that's what happened. Iskra's wyvern attacked Petra's, killed, and in the course of things, Petra's wyvern protected her, so Manon dove to save her life. But the wyvern died. So she asks, why did she save her life that day? And Manon says that Keely, and says the wyvern's name, gave her life for Petra, so she would not disgrace that sacrifice by allowing Petra to die. And that actually really touches Petra, that she remembered her name, the name of the wyvern. And Petra makes this convincing speech and tells the matrons that this must be a misunderstanding and they shouldn't lose their obedient wing leader over this. So the matron tells Manon that, yes, you're right, it would be foolish to lose an heir over the death of a sentinel. So instead, one of the 13 will die to make up for the blood spilled. And the matron chooses Astrid, because we all know that the grandmother has it out for Astrid for some reason. But I also think it's not an even exchange. Like a sentinel versus second.
Yeah, not at all. But it's just because that's what she wants to do.
Yeah. So then we go back to Tower of Dawn, Chapter 7. So we're back in Chaol's point of view. So once Nesrin left to go visit her family, he calls for his servant Kaja, and he asks her for two things. The first is to go to the docks and ask about any info on Rifthold. He wants to know, like, did Dorian survive? Did anybody, like, did Nesrin's parents survive? Like, he wants to know what's going on.
Yeah. Was Dorian captured? Like, they don't know anything.
And then he asks for a second thing and doesn't immediately tell us what it is, but then it jumps to what it is. It was to wheel him to Argan's chambers and have a meeting. So remember last week, Chaol's plan was to, like, interrogate Argan and get information out of him. And we're like, yeah, that'll happen.
Yeah.
So Argan sort of comes into the sitting room where Chaol has been pushed, and they make small talk, and Chaol is, like, frustrated about it because he wants information. And he asks Argan about the information he received about Rifthold, but Argan sort of refuses to tell him anything and then dismisses him because he was like, us being seen talking together sends a message that I don't want to deal with. By him being seen with him is sort of like, you're sympathetic to their cause, essentially. And he doesn't want to deal with that racket. And, like, that's just it. He just immediately dismisses him and sends him on his way. Obviously, Chaol is pissed.
Yeah.
Kaja returned from the docks, has no news. So that was annoying. And then Nesrin doesn't return for dinner. And Chaol is like, he's worried, but he doesn't want to show everyone that he's worried because he doesn't want to let them know that he doesn't want to, like, show a weakness, essentially.
Yeah. To show how much he cares about her.
Yeah.
Because, like, as much as they are looking for allies, they're still up in the air, so they could turn into enemies.
Mm-hmm. So they're all at dinner minus Nesrin, but Yrene actually was invited to dinner. And
shows.
Yeah. And she sat with Hasar and her partner, Renya. And, like, Cashin sort of tries to make eyes at her, and she doesn't make eyes back. And somebody sort of mentions that Yrene is Chaol's healer, and Cashin then makes eyes at Chaol, and essentially is like, back off, she's mine. Which Chaol understands, and it's like, yeah, she's territory. Great, guys. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
And then Cashin sort of, I feel like he's doing it to sort of show how much he knows her, maybe, like, to be like, he starts, like, talking about her credentials and how amazing she is and blah, blah, blah. And that makes her uncomfortable, because she's like, I don't love you, back off.
Yeah.
So Chaol decides to, like, help her out. He's like, she's my healer, like, she's doing me a solid, so I should probably look out for her. So he changes the subject and asks Cashin about his job training the land armies. So he sort of pulls Cashin in a different direction, so he stops talking about Yrene.
Yeah. Because it's awkward.
Yeah.
So, like, I would leave if I were her.
Yeah.
Like,
and Cashin is being very, like, obvious. Like, everybody knows he has a thing for her. So, Cashin sort of goes on and on about his job. And Argan eventually has to stop him. And is like, give it up. Like, essentially, you're talking too much. But everybody sort of understands that he's revealing too much.
Mm-hmm.
And Chaol understands then, because he immediately listens to his brother and shuts up. So he understands that Cashin is never going to be the Kagan. Because
no, he's not.
He's a soldier. He obeys. He's not a rule maker, he's a rule follower. So he's too obedient to be the Kagan. So Chaol's, like, super stressed about Nesrin, so he left dinner early, pretending to be tired. Obviously, again, he didn't want to reveal how much she meant to him. And he actually waited up for her until after 1 a.m. And when she finally comes in, they fight. Because he's pissed she didn't send word as to why she was gone and that when she'd be back. But she said, like, this was her city and she's safer here than in Rifthold because Rifthold is garbage.
Yeah.
And, like, again, he didn't experience that in Rifthold because he was in the palace the entire time. Mm-hmm. He doesn't know anything.
I don't blame him for being annoyed, though. Like, they're there for a job, and she is supposed to be going to these suppers. Like, she could have just sent a message and been like, hey, I'm gonna stay with my family.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, but, like, she sort of just, like, dude, you need to back off. I'm safe here. And she's, she's like, nobody threw rocks at me here. Like, insinuating people did that in Rifthold.
Well, yeah, and I think we got that in the last book she talked about.
Yeah.
A specific situation.
But, like, then she says, also, in case you were wondering, my family is okay. Like, you didn't ask, but they are. Yeah. And it's like, oh, yeah, he probably should have.
Yeah.
So she says, like, they did manage to get out, but they don't know where they are. Mm-hmm. So she sort of stalks off to her room, and he gets ready and gets in bed, but he stays awake waiting for her to come back for ages. And I'm like, why? Like, I don't get why at all. Like, you guys just had a fight. Do you expect her to come back and apologize? Is that what you're waiting up for? Because, dude, it ain't happening.
I don't think it's going to be an apology. Maybe he's like, maybe she'll pick up where she left off this morning.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Anyway, so jump back now to Empire of Storms chapter 12. We are in Aelin's point of view. And it's been a while.
Yeah.
So they're traveling to the coast, and Aelin feels bad because she said, like, Terrassen used to be rich and lush, and now it's, like, really threadbare, and all the people are gaunt and poor, and she thinks it's all her fault for staying away so long. And, like, we can't really comment on that. I don't know if it would have made a difference or not, but...
Yeah, she would have probably been murdered at, ages ago before magic came back because of who she is.
So... She took to leaving extra gold pieces behind for people, like when they stopped at an inn or when they, when somebody on the road, like, offers them hay for their horses or something like that, she would leave, like, hide gold pieces for them. But by the time they reached the port town of Ilium after a week of travel, she didn't, because it didn't make her feel better. I guess she was doing it to sort of ease her conscience.
Help her conscience, yeah.
But I'm like, maybe it wasn't helping you feel better, but I'm sure the people that you were giving money to appreciated the money.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, I get that it's not helping, but...
You could have still done it.
If they're helping you, you should still leave the money.
Yeah. And, like, leaving them a little bit extra, like, you're still gonna help feed them for a bit, regardless of whether it makes you feel better or not. It makes them feel better. Like, maybe not about you, but about their life in general. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I thought that was a bit... Yeah. Yeah. So they were there to visit a temple of stone. Okay, so the Fae made this little model of this temple, and that's why Aelin was like, we have to stop here. So this temple is actually where Brannon had first stepped on the land that would become Terrassen. So they've sort of immortalized it by adding, like, a monument there. However, Ilium is under Aderlin's occupation right now, even though Dorian has ordered everybody to move out. This place is still...
But yeah, nothing he says anymore matters.
No. You're right.
He's gone.
Yeah.
In the wind.
So Aedion sort of thought that they could bypass Ilium and head north. But Aelin sort of is like, no, we're not leaving these people under Aderlinian occupation. She's like, I refuse.
She's also not telling them that she was told to come to this temple.
No, you're correct. Like... You're right there. She's like, no, I'm not leaving them like this. But you're right. She was also not told that the Fae told her to come here, the little fairies. So the reason that Ilium is under Aderlinian occupation right now is because Roland Havillard, who is like cousin Roland from book 2, and he was in Queen of Shadows, but like, or was it Airfire? Queen of Shadows. He was in Queen of Shadows very briefly, but he wasn't named.
He was murdered.
Yeah, he wasn't named.
Yeah.
But his father, who was one of the most powerful lords in Aderlin, heard that Dorian was on the run and that Aelin was also on the run, so he thought, why not? I'll expand my territory.
Yeah, great guy.
Yeah. So she says that she doesn't want to hide, and that even though there are 50 soldiers here, she wants to send a message about who this land belongs to. And Aedion is like, are you sending this message to Aderlin or are you sending it to Darrow?
Hey.
But Aelin's like, dude, it's about freeing my people who have been dealing with Aderlanian pieces of shit for ages. But Aedion sort of reminds her, like, this port is normally the first one that's attacked because it's an advantageous situation, like, position. So, like, yeah, we could free them, but then we'll leave and it could easily be attacked again. And Aelin knows that, but she also knows that symbols have power.
Mm-hmm.
And she reminded Aedion that this used to be the home of the Mycenians. And we get a little bit into the Mycenians, that they're a myth and were banished 300 years ago. They ruled Ilium as crime lords and helped in a war a long time ago. So they were legitimized and, like, given Ilium as territory. But then in the next war, or in another war down the road, they refused to help. So they were exiled. And this is another reference to Assassin's Blade. Another one.
Yeah. And also some good old foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is it. So apparently they were a people that fought with sea dragons. And legend says that only when sea dragons returned would the Mycenians again come home. So there's our little bit of sort of foreshadowing there. So she also is like, this temple is my birthright, and I'm not going to allow the insult of them occupying it and like disrespecting it. Because they're like in their, they've like made this their camp, that temple, and they're treating it with shit.
What's the word? Desecrating.
Yes, thank you. That's a great word.
Yeah.
Aedion sort of suggests and sort of goes off on a little tangent here, like nothing to do with the temple, which is, I got confused as I was reading it, because I was like, she needs the temple for the flower, but she doesn't. It was just a side note.
Yeah.
Aedion thinks that she should find the king's flame, which is a flower. And he says no one could refute your rule then, because only the undisputed ruler can, like, either force it to bloom or find it or something. It's sort of not clear.
Yeah.
And apparently this particular flower blossomed, like, everywhere the day that Brannon stepped foot on the continent, and her uncle Orlon actually found one in his second decade of ruling. So he was, like, into the teens at this point of ruling. And he actually found one. And he had it framed in his office. And Darrow actually managed to sneak it out and keep it, so he still has it. But the flower, the last King's Flame before that to have been seen, was 95 years previous. So it's a super rare flower. So that's
like,
sort
how
of.
does he think that she's gonna get it? Like, she's not even ruler, period. Let alone, like, on dispute. Like, it just, yeah. I'm like, Aedion, this is also a myth. Let's let her do her plan. You're not very good at them.
Right. But it was just a really, like, odd turn.
Yeah.
To go from talking about, like, this, like, temple is my birthright. I need it. It's mine. And, like, the Mycenians. And then all of a sudden, you should find this flower.
And I guess it's because, like, this is where he stepped onto land. Like, it is related in a way. It's also just an information, like, info dump. Like, here, you need to know this.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so we go over to Dorian's point of view now, and he and Rowan are in a boat sailing south, and Dorian just feels, like, useless, dejected, maybe. Like, he's in a bad place.
Yeah.
Like, he's not really doing anything to help Rowan here. Rowan just saved him like the damsel in distress he was, and then he can't really help them get anywhere. But Rowan tells him he needs to eat because he needs food to sustain his magic. Obviously, like, kind of like when you exert yourself physically, you use energy. It's the same with magic. Especially after, like, he healed himself from a poisonous wound. So, like, he used a lot of magic. And he destroyed those wyverns and witches. So, Dorian's like, oh, I didn't realize that. And he's like, oh, Aelin didn't tell you any of this? And he's like, no, I guess she didn't have time. And I'm like, I don't really think it was Aelin's job to tell him.
No.
But I get that he doesn't understand, but also, like, it's a bit of common sense.
But I mean, like, it's not. I disagree with that because he's literally grown up in a world where magic was not okay, right? Like,
Yeah.
like anybody that had a whiff of magic were like executed. So, like,
Yeah.
you would do your best to avoid any knowledge of magic. So, I don't think it's common sense for him.
I know, but I just think, like, you use energy, you need energy is the common sense part.
I guess.
Like, the food part, I was kind of like, yeah, if you feel shitty, you should either sleep or eat, in my opinion. Or sometimes if it's mentally, exercise. But that's a different thing. Anyway, so Dorian thinks of Manon then and how she saved him, and he knows it's for, like, her own purposes, but he thinks her darkness, violence, and stark honesty is, like, super intriguing, and he also thinks, and I quote, there would be no secrets with her, no lies. And I'm like, what? Are we already, like, what is he planning a relationship with her in some way? What is he thinking?
I think maybe he's thinking, like, politically. Because, like,
Okay.
he's, he is attracted to her. We already know that.
Yes, yeah.
But I think he means sort of, like, because he's already asked her to align herself with him and fight with him. And I think he's sort of thinking, like, more along the lines of he knows that she's not going to pussyfoot around him just because he's the quote-unquote king. She'll tell him the truth. She's not going to lie. She's not going to keep any secrets. Like, she'll tell it like it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it came up because he was thinking, like, she obviously had her own reasons to save his life.
Yeah.
But I think he can tell, like, obviously that wasn't her orders, too. So, like, she's kind of rogue.
Yeah.
We get back to the magic a bit. Rowan tells Dorian that Aelin siphons off her magic to keep it from consuming her. But it all takes energy. So, like, he needs to learn to master his power or it'll end up destroying him. Dorian is, like, obviously all in his feels and shit, but he says his magic only destroys, and, like, it wasn't enough to save Sorsha. And Rowan says that his magic wasn't enough to save his mate either. Like, he understands. Mm-hmm. And Dorian at this point thinks that he has felt the bond between Aelin and Rowan, and he actually thought that they were mates, and they just hadn't announced it to everybody. So he's surprised to hear that Rowan had a mate before.
Mm.
Which is interesting, and I forgot that the first time I read it. I forgot he said that. And, like, obviously, Aelin and Rowan would say it's the Karanon bond.
Yes.
But he doesn't really know that. So Rowan tells him that he's going to hate the world, himself, and his magic, but Dorian doesn't have the luxury of a world at peace, and he has he has so many people depending on him as the king, like, he can't wallow in it, kind of like Rowan really did for a very long time.
Yeah.
So he's empathizing, but he's also like, I'm sorry, you just need to figure this
You
shit
need to
out.
suck it up.
Basically. Dorian then asks Rowan, like, what he's supposed to do about his kingdom, and Rowan says his people will realize he's not dead, but it's up to Dorian to show that he didn't abandon them, so he needs to get allies now. Like, that is his job. And obviously starting with Skulls Bay and the Dead Islands. Rowan says that Aelin has a fraught history with Ralph, so Dorian needs to, like, offer Ralph anything that they can to get them on their side, because Aelin's not going to be a whole lot of help.
Yeah.
Dorian says he's never met a pirate, and Rowan said he met Aelin when she was Selena, and Rolf can't be much worse, which is just kind of funny.
Yeah.
Dorian then asks Rowan to teach him about magic, and Rowan says he'll teach him what he can before they arrive in Skulls Bay, but then they'll probably need to find somebody else. And Dorian is like, but you taught Aelin. And he says that Aelin is his heart, and their magic understands each other, but Dorian's magic is different, and his magic is something that Rowan hasn't encountered before, so he doesn't really think that he can help him as much. But he does say that he'll teach him control and how to spiral down and how to take care of himself. And Dorian just kind of goes back and asks if when Rowan met Aelin, he knew, like, basically that she was his heart. And he's like, no. They wanted to kill each other in the beginning, which obviously is air of fire and funny. He also says they were both in a dark place and helped each other. And, like, he tells Dorian that he's going to find his way out of this, too.
Yeah, that's nice.
It's a nice chat they have. So, we go over to Tower of Dawn now, chapter 8 to 10. And we start in Yrene's point of view. So, she shows up the next morning, even though she was out late the night before with Hussar and Renya. And she kind of thinks about how she's avoiding caution, and she feels bad about it. But she feels bad because she wanted to talk to him after his sister died, but she didn't want to lead him on, and she's, like, doesn't want to deal with his feelings, which is fair.
But at the same time, how bad is it that just saying, hey, sorry for your loss, would be misconstrued as, I have feelings for you? Like, that is some messed up shit.
Yeah, it's really, like, is he actually this bad, or is she afraid that he's going to read into it? Because, like, if you can't just, like, how starved is he for female attention that he's like, oh, she must love me now?
But also, like, can he not take no for an answer? Like, what the hell?
It's a weird situation. And it never, like, I don't really remember this whole book, but, like, it doesn't super get resolved, I don't remember.
I also don't remember.
But we'll have to see. I just don't remember. But she also thinks to herself, like, it almost seems like she could have feelings for him, but she's like, I'm leaving and I don't want to deal with that. So maybe that's the issue. Maybe it is that she does have, like, a few feelings, but she's like, I'm leaving and I don't want to be married into this family that kills children if they would be a threat. You know, fair.
Which is valid.
So she walks into Chaol's room, and obviously there's the servant working there, and it makes her think of the slaves in Otterlin, and then she's pissed off again. Rightfully so. I don't, like, you know. She also notices some tension between Chaol and Nesrin, because she's super observant and can notice everything.
Mm-hmm.
And she also notices that Nesrin seems more focused than she did yesterday. And I'm like, how are you noticing all this shit on, like, people by just looking at them? But as I continue to say in books, I'm like, oh, maybe it's something to do with her magic. Like, maybe she can, I don't know, whatever. So Yrene tells them that she spoke to her supervisor and she would like to get him walking again. Chaol doesn't really react, but Nesrin asks how likely how likely it'll be that she succeeds. And she obviously says, like, she can't guarantee it, but, you know, she'll try, kind of thing.
Yeah. And sort of the same with any doctor. Like, doctors, you know, they're not going to say 100% certainty on anything.
Exactly. Yrene does tell Nesrin, like, it is going to take a while so she can do other things while they work. And that she'll be able to handle moving Chaol around and all of that stuff. So Nesrin just says that she had some invitations yesterday that she'll see about, and she goes to leave. And Chaol is, like, still super grumpy and annoyed here, and he just tells her to send word, basically because he's pissed off about last night. Yrene tells him that Nesrin was smart not to speak of her plans because the walls have ears and mouths, and, like, we kind of said that earlier.
Yeah.
And she actually tells him, like, all of the servants are indebted to either viziers or to the Coggins kids. So, like, they all have somebody that they report back to, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think they mean that, like, in addition to being paid their regular salary for being servants, one or more members of the royal family pay them an additional sum to sort of be their eyes and ears and to, like, report back on everything that's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Or give them, like, favors or, like, help them out in other ways. Because I think they're paid really well anyway, so, like, the money isn't as big of a deal. I think it's more, like, other things. But, yeah, so I can't remember who she's indebted to, but it doesn't really... I think it comes up later. So he asks, like, who owns... Is it Kaja?
Kaja.
Yeah. He asks who owns Kaja, but Yrene doesn't know specifically for her. And she also says, like, no one owns them because they're not slaves. And she asks him then if he owned any slaves in Otterland, because obviously that reminds her of it. But he says no, he never did. He also says he believes in paying people, and he believes in, like, human freedom. Like, he doesn't believe in slavery.
Yeah. He believes people are, like, believes in basic human rights, essentially.
Yes. The bar is on the floor.
Yeah. The bare minimum.
Right? And then he says, but he kept the opinion to himself. And you're like, really? Yes, the bar is on the floor. And she's kind of like, that's still shitty to keep it to yourself, basically. But he says his king, i.e. Dorian, abolished all the slave camps. So that's good. Like, it is good.
But again, like, we're scraping the bottom of the floor here. Like, yeah, it's good, but, like, congratulations on having an opinion that people are human and should be treated like humans.
Yeah. That you
like,
never...
I don't think that's something he should be congratulated for.
No. That he never voiced, and that, like, I don't know. It's not great, but, you know. He does say that there are things he regrets from his past, hence why he needs to get out of the chair to stop them this time from, like, happening again. But she's just like, you could do that from your chair. Like, you're not unable to, like, do all the things you were before, kind of thing. Which is a big thing for him, obviously. He's very much, like, trapped in his chair mentally, too, because he's, like, he doesn't think he can do anything that he used to do. And he has such a low opinion of himself now because of it. But she's trying to tell him, like, you could do it, anything that you could do before, you could still do it. Which I think, like, it's obviously hard for him. He doesn't know anybody else that's going through this. Like, you can't just say, oh, you can do it all. Like, people need mentors. They need people that have been through the same situation to show them how to do something. So, like, it's not just obvious if you've gone your entire life being able to walk, then you're in a chair. Like, you need help to figure out how to do things. But, like,
I also... Actually, one of the things that I really enjoy about this sort of storyline, and we'll see it expanded upon a little bit in this section and further down the line, is that she doesn't, I want to say, baby him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she sees that he has muscles on his arms, so she expects him to be able to, like, move himself around to a certain extent. He can wheel himself.
Yeah.
He can get himself from the chair to the bed or the couch or whatever with his upper body.
Yeah.
Everybody else sort of enables him to sort of be like, oh, here, let me do that for you. Like, everyone else treats him like an invalid.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, he's sort of reverted into that role of an invalid.
Yeah.
Whereas she doesn't do that. She's not like, you can't do anything, you poor baby. She's like, you can do that yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah. But I think for the, like, there's a difference between, like, daily shit and being able to, like, go into battle. Like, I do think he needs somebody to help him figure out how to do things. Like, he can't just figure out everything. Like, he can figure out how to get on the bed or the chair and all that stuff, like he has. But there's certain things, like, that'll come up kind of next week, but, like, riding a horse is something that'll come up. Like,
yeah.
You know? So I do think that, like, there's somewhere in between these two these two like approaches that people are having with him that I think would be helpful. And I think the only reason she's so harsh about what she's saying is because she just doesn't like him because of who he is. But like, I feel like if he was somebody else, she'd be more into like helping him figure it out. And she does.
Yeah.
As the book goes on, she does help him figure some things out. So like, I just think it takes time. But yeah. She tells him to get on the couch, and she doesn't want him on the bed because it's inappropriate without Nesrin there. And he says that she isn't his, like Nesrin isn't his, and then kind of like trails off, and we're like, okay, I guess they're not together. But Yrene just says it could be an issue for her, and he's like, oh, is it because of caution? And he asks if she has any wishes where that's concerned. And you're like, that's none of your business.
Yeah. Especially when she already dislikes you. Like, don't open up on... Like, don't ask her personal questions like that.
Yeah. But she actually does say that she doesn't have any interest because she doesn't want to risk any potential children. Kind of like we said earlier. So he takes off all of his clothes, basically, except for his underwear, and she has to help with his pants. And, like, as she's taking off his pants, she's, like, admiring his muscles and his ass and everything. And you're like,
of course.
This is so obvious. And she actually, like, prods his legs with her magic, and she can tell that his leg muscles are atrophying. And she says that he needs to start exercising his legs for when he's able to use them again. And he's just like, what do you mean exercise my legs? I can't move them. So yeah, she says that she'll show him exercises that he can do for his legs, which is good. She then asks like what kind of magic gave him this wound. And he doesn't really want to answer, but she pushes. And then she asks if it was fire. And he immediately answers no. He was like, definitely not. So obviously she was thinking, like, was it Aelin?
Aelin, yeah.
He does say that it did happen on, like, midsummer, and she knows that's the day that magic came back. So she's kind of like, it had to have happened related. And she asks if he was fighting against magic wielders who got their magic back, like in kind of like a protecting his king from them kind of way. Not Dorian, but like the other old king. But he says no. It wasn't against those magic wielders. And she kind of realizes that like there's some trauma here as well. Like clearly the wound was horrible, and he also doesn't really want to speak about it. So she kind of thinks like, there's going to be some emotional healing as well, which is going to be like talk therapy, basically. Which she's not super excited about either. So she touches his scar, and she feels cold, dark anger and agony. And it's no magic she's felt before. And she actually thinks that it's not of this world, which is like smart.
On the nose.
Yeah. And she, like, kind of gets wrapped up inside of it, and Chaol has to, like, call her out of it. And she flares her magic, and that magic retreats a bit. Which is, like, our first clue in this game of chess. Yeah. So she asks what it is, and he's just like, is it inside of me? Like, what's going on? And she can see genuine fear in his eyes. And she says that she thinks there's an echo of it inside of the wound. But, like, not something actually sentient kind of thing.
Right.
But she says she needs to know what it is before she can help him. And he says that he can't tell her. And he kind of just looks to the door. So she actually starts massaging his neck. And he's absolutely loving it and, like, moaning and shit involuntarily. But it gives her the opportunity to, like, lean into his ear and whisper, and they can, like, he can tell her that way.
Yeah.
So we go over to Chaol's point of view now, and he thinks to himself that he tells her everything, and then he lists off a whole bunch of shit that he doesn't actually tell her. So he tells her everything except about the keys, about who actually gave him the wound, about Dorian being enslaved, about who the Duke and the King actually were. So basically it sounds like he just tells her about the valg in general.
Amazing.
I'm like, he tells her everything except all the important bits, which is fair. Like, she could also be indebted to somebody and selling his information or something.
Yeah.
He says that, like, the blow was meant to kill him, but he was saved by a magic talisman and a stroke of luck. And she tells him that she needs to research some more. And he asks if there's a risk to her, but she doesn't know yet. Obviously, she needs to research and figure some shit out.
Yeah.
But he thinks that, like, he'll actually refuse being healed if there is a risk to her. Which is, you know, he's a good guy. That's his thing. TM, good guy. So then he asks about fees, because he thinks it's going to be super pricey, obviously, to be healed.
Of course.
And she just says that if he wants to make a donation, he can, but Silva gave them their gifts, so it's not right to charge for it. And I kind of love that. I just think makes sense. Nice of them.
Yeah.
So he then asks why she came to help him, because he obviously could tell that she was, like, on the fence yesterday. And she says that she was actually afraid that he or Nesrin would use it against her if she refused. And she plans to go back to, like, Fenharrow and help with... and help with the fighting and shit.
Yeah.
So she doesn't want them to fuck her over, basically, when she goes back. He tells her, like, they never would hold it against her, but she says he worked for a man who would. And he kind of tries to defend himself a little bit. He says, like, he asks if she would believe that he was not a part of all of it, and that, like, other people did all the dirty work and all of that shit. And she just kind of looks at him, and he admits, like, he knew that the king was doing unspeakable things, but his focus was always on protecting Dorian, because he was not his father and he was the future. And he says that, like, he settled for the status quo and ignored what was happening because he needed to make sure that Dorian lived, and if Dorian had rebelled or Chaol had rebelled, the king could have killed Dorian.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, like, they met somebody who led them down a path that he resisted until it cost him and others too much. So she might actually resent him, but he hates himself more than she ever can. So we're, like, kind of getting into he's realizing that
he was the
right.
dickiest of dicks during Queen of Shadows.
Yeah, exactly. She asks what he plans now, and he says he's not sure because he's still learning, but it starts with wiping the Valg and the Duke from their homeland. So she tells him then that he's going to need to face what happened to heal, and he says he already knows what happened. And she says, we'll see about that. And it's just like a foreshadowy thing.
Yeah. She, like, he's it's not enough to just heal his physical trauma. He's going to have to heal his mind as well.
Yeah. Which I would be so annoyed with.
But, like, it's almost like he has to have his reckoning the same way Aelin had her reckoning.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Sure.
Because she wasn't innocent either. She's done some terrible things.
Yeah.
But she had to face all that in order to heal and become the queen that she is.
Yeah. And, like, we need him to work through the shit he's done so that we can maybe not hate him.
Yes. Maybe.
Yeah. So, yeah. Back at the Torre, Yrene is in what they call the womb, and it's like dozens of baths, and it's like from a hot spring, and the water like recycles through and stays warm, and it sounds amazing, and I want to go there.
So, like, do we think, is it like, I didn't pay enough attention when they were describing it. So, like, it's a bunch of baths.
Mm-hmm.
Do we think they're natural baths, like natural, like divots that the water is just naturally sitting in, or do we think they've installed, like, copper, like, tubs that they can fill and then drain?
I assumed, rightfully or wrongfully, that they were, like, dug out in the ground baths that then they put, like, pumps through so that the water pumps from bath to bath to bath and then back into the spring and then, like, kind of does, like, a loop.
So that means if you get in the first bath and then the pump pumps your water out, it pumps it into someone else's bath, and then they're using your dirty bath water?
Yeah, but it's not like, they're not like baths for cleaning yourself. Like, you have to shower before you get in, and it's all about, like...
I know, it's about, like, restoring your mind.
Yeah, so, don't know. Maybe they have filters in them, too. That would be good.
Maybe.
They don't really get into the filtration system. So yeah, these baths, basically, for as long as anyone can remember, all of the acolytes would hang a bell there with their name and the date they started, and then they would get in the bath to, like, symbolize their start and their birth into, like, Silba's training, whatever, because it's, like, representative of Silba's womb. So Yrene is sitting in the tub and just thinking of everything that Chaol told her, and, like, it kind of changes how she sees Aderlin and, like, the actual threat there. Like, it's not just war, it's not just a greedy man, it's actual, like, demons and possession and monsters. So, like, it changes a bit what she's gonna have to do when she goes back. And she also thinks that, like, Chaol's injury isn't just physical, there's also a magical element to it, and her magic awoke it, so she needs to research the valg some more. So that's, like, the echoey thing there. So she's just lying in the tub, and she hears the darkness around her whisper to her, and I kind of wonder if this is, like, Silba, but I don't know.
Yeah.
But she said, the darkness says that she must enter where she fears, but she is struggling a lot, and she feels like it's a waste of time to help a lord of Aderlin and to delay her return, and she tells the darkness that she can't, and the darkness responds she won't. So she's kind of getting pushed to help him as well from possibly Silba. We're not sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like, I'll say, allusions in this book to godly interference.
Yeah.
And whether it actually is or whether it's not is not clear at all at this point.
Yeah. But, like, when you finish Empire of Storms and you figure out everything, it kind of is like, oh, it probably is them just pushing for a future that they can, like, manipulate. So.
Yeah.
So then she hears a healer come in who is crying, so she goes over to sit with her and hold her hand. And the healer tells her that she was 3 years old. And the healer says sometimes she wishes this gift was never given to her. And she asks Yrene if she's ever felt like that, but Yrene just thinks to herself, like, she's never felt like that, even in the hardest times, even when her mother burned in front of her. Like, she never regretted, I guess, having the gift. So she just sits with her and holds her hand and just doesn't really speak. She just kind of listens. Yeah. We go to Chaol's point of view now, and he's at supper, and Hussar asks if Yrene has healed him yet.
Yes, sure, it's immediate. He's still in the chair.
Yeah, she's kind of a bitch too, but, you know. And obviously Chaol just says, like, they're in the initial stages and it's going to be a long process. And she's just like, how fortunate that you'll be staying here. And he's like, oh yes, fortunate.
Yeah. Hussar, I will say, I do not remember Hussar being the bitch that she is.
Yeah, but it gets worse.
I know, but that's what I mean, like, from my recollection of the book, Hussar is, like, the bestie, like,
yeah,
she's always on their side, and, like, she's an ally. But, rereading it, I'm like, geez, Hussar! Like, she does some bitchy things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I felt the same way the first time, and then the second, I think I read it not too long ago, a second time, and I was like, holy shit, man. She's cutting. She's like, I feel like this is what Aelin would be like if she just grew up.
Yes, in a palace, like, as a royal.
In a palace, or even just with Erawan. Like, if she hadn't gone through everything that she went through in the books. Like, more so with Erawan, I think, than with her parents, maybe. But we just don't know much about her parents. Maybe they would have raised her poorly. But yeah. So Chaol thinks of Yrene then, and of her implying that, like, they're gonna have to talk. And he hates the thought of it, and he's like, I'll tell her that we can't do that. It's obviously gonna work.
Mm-hmm.
He also thinks about, like, how he's keeping an eye out for anyone acting odd, or anyone wearing, like, a black ring, and he actually thinks maybe he could ask the Coggin to, like, ask everybody to cut themselves to see if their blood is black or red. Which is just interesting. Can you imagine? I guess, like, the Coggin can do anything, but it just seems crazy. He then notices Princess Duva, and she's by the Coggin, because he had looked at the Coggin, and she watches more than participates. And he thinks, like, she misses nothing, which is just kind of ironic, because he's missing so much, but...
Yeah.
So Chaol actually cuts in talks to the Coggin and says that, like, he says thank you for getting a healer to help him, but the Coggin says that the healers aren't his, and he just goes back to talking to the vizier or whoever. Vizier. But Chaol cuts in again and asks for a private meeting, and the Coggin says that he needs to talk to the vizier to get a meeting. And he looks at the vizier and he's just like, nah, that's not gonna happen. The Coggin also says, like, he's helping his wife through this mourning period, and Chaol then apologizes because he's like, yeah, this is not the right time to push. And Chaol's not really good at he's not good at this. He's not good at knowing when to try to talk to people. Like, he's not, if you remember Silver Flames when he did it, he's kind of like Cassian. He's not really a courtier. He's not accustomed to that kind of stuff. Like, he's a warrior. They're kind of similar.
Yeah.
In that way only.
Yeah.
So Chaol apologizes and he turns to Sartak to ask about his Rook Kadara. And, like, the whole table kind of jokes together about how, like, Hazar hates Kadara because she tried to eat her the first time that they met. And Hazar kind of, like, jabs back at Sartak, and it's kind of like a sibling moment that's actually nice for once. And Sartak says that he flies every day after breakfast, and then he's usually gone until supper. And Nesrin and Chaol, like, share a look, and he's basically telling her to, like, go meet him after breakfast and go out with him.
Yeah.
We go over to Yrene's point of view now, and she's in the library, and it's a dark and stormy night. And, of course. Yeah. She asked the head librarian, Nusha? Sure, Nusha, for texts on wounds from demons and dark magic, and she gave her, like, stack after stack of books. One scroll, Nusha didn't recognize the language, but Yrene is looking through it now, and they look like runes that she's never seen before. And we're like,
we know what those are.
We do. And we know someone who can inexplicably read them all perfectly, even though she barely learned.
She had, like, a month of lessons.
Yeah, it's wild. So she looks through most of the books that she can read, and they don't really have any information she's looking for. She hears a distant click, which she kind of assumes is a mouse, and she thinks of the 36 bast cats in the library. So apparently there are no more or no less, and they've been there forever. And Yrene doesn't know how they're replaced, but they just, like, if one dies, another one pops up.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Are they just like when I read it, I was like, are they ghosts? Like, what are they?
Yeah, it's interesting. Because then she says, like, healers have seen them move through pools of shadows and seen them reading. And, like, obviously that's kind of like, that sounds more like ghost stories, but it makes me think of, like, the other worlds. Like, if they can move through shadow, are they moving to different worlds? Are the cats coming from libraries in other worlds in this situation?
Yeah.
Like, is there a connection here somehow? There's cats in a lot of these libraries. I feel like there's something going on.
Yeah. I mean, I wish our libraries all had cats.
Same. I love it. Yeah, so she then pulls a book in EoS towards herself, and, like, her mother taught her some before she died, because her father was actually from EoS, but she says, like, Towers women don't marry, they just have babies, so generally they'll just find a man, get pregnant, and say peace out. So she doesn't know her father, she just learned a tiny bit of EoS from her mother.
I love it.
Yeah. She's able to translate the name of the book, and it's just called The Song of Beginning. And she flips through, and she's, like, struggling with the words a bit, but she finds some illustrations. And one is an army of dark soldiers kneeling before a gate of swirling black. And there's no, like, the gate isn't attached to a wall. There's no keep. It's just, like, a gate freestanding, nothing around it. And it is black swirliness.
Yeah.
And then there are 3 figures with human-like bodies and clawed hands holding swords. And she's like, they must be valg.
She's jumping to a lot of conclusions
Jesus Christ,
here.
right?
That are correct, but still, like...
Yes. She's jumping to lots of conclusions here. Because she doesn't know about the word keys or the word gate. And she's like, yes, valg. She flips some more pages and she sees another picture with the caption, Orcus Mantis Erawan, 3 valg kings, wielders of the keys. And she thinks to herself, like, Chaol didn't mention any of this shit about keys or a gate. But she's, like, kind of putting it together herself. There's another illustration, and it's, like, 3 panels, and it shows a man tied down with black mist going towards him, and then the mist going down his throat, and then he is blank-faced with black eyes, and she thinks, like, he's infested by this black mist.
She's really, like, I must say, she really found a resource that, really lays it all out there for her.
Yeah, she doesn't need to learn like the rest of us did in all the other
Well, but it's just funny because it's like, she literally was like, I need to research black magic, and then found a text about black magic that serves her needs exactly.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's just like, it's just funny that, like, the book is literally laying out everything she needs to know about the valg, like, explicitly.
So easily.
Yeah.
And
when, like, in reality, when we do research on stuff, it's like, you get one little bit here, one little bit over there. Like, it's never always laid out for you exactly.
No, and, like, why is it so hard for people to know this past if it's literally just in this book there for anybody to read? Like, why does nobody know about this? But she does think, like, Chaol did tell her about, like, the rings and the collars and being able to be infesting. So, like, that part just confirms that he was telling the truth. But still, it's like, this book is quite the book. So she hears another click, and for the first time in the Torre, she feels fear. Because, like, she's felt very safe here her entire time here. But she's getting this feeling that something's not right. And she thinks to herself, like, healing magic doesn't work defensively. Like, you can't really do anything to an opponent. But she has learned to, like, read the room and notice a shift in the air. So she's like, I need to get out of here. So she takes the Eelway book and any other books there that she hasn't looked at yet, and she thinks back to the stranger from Assassin's Blade.
Stranger again, yep.
And she remembers her instructions. She basically told her to have common sense. If you feel a change in the room, leave. To look confident and like she'd put up a fight. And to scream fire, because people will actually listen to that. Whereas, like, if you scream rape or theft, like, cowards won't come towards you. But if you scream fire, people will start running. So it's just, like, good lessons that she had learned. She sticks to bright corridors, but she hears something in the stack next to her. So she yells to, like, basically no one ahead of her, but pretends that there's someone there, asking why they're here so late, and that kind of slows the thing in the stack next to her down. But then she walks into something soft and hard, and she sees it's actually the healer from the baths that she saw earlier, and they're dead, and basically like a husk of herself. Like, she's, having read Air of Fire, we think back to those bodies. So she calls out again to this invisible person that's not there that Cook is expecting her, and then she rushes forward and ends up being able to join a group of acolytes that are walking by, and she thinks like they're in her class and they recognize that something's up, so they kind of stick with her. They walk to the atrium, and one of the Basque cats jumps up from a chair and starts hissing at the library behind them. So it can sense something as well.
Yep.
They go to the head of the library, and Yrene tells her that a healer has been gravely injured and to get everyone out and call for the guards. So the head of the library rings a bell 3 times, and Yrene thinks, like, the first ring is to listen, the second ring is listen now, and the third ring is get out. And the warning is from, like, before the Coggin was a ruler here, when there was, like, lots of battles over this place, and the ruler changed a lot, so they never knew if they would be, like, friendly or not, so...
Yeah, and apparently it's, like, a secret code. Like, nobody knows what those rings mean, except for the people that live in the Torre and the royal guards.
Yeah.
So, like, the royal guards know what it means, so they know 3 bells, oh, shit, get to the Torre. And all the people inside the Torre know, shit, 3 bells, evacuate. But, like, to all the other people that, like, just live in the city, none of them know what that means. So, like, it's a secret code that they can use, because if there's an intruder, they're not going to know what that means.
Yeah. And she says it could even just be, like, the signal that the library is closing.
Yeah.
And then she also thinks that from that time before the Coggin, there are escape tunnels under the Torre. I'm sure that'll never come up again.
Nope.
So as people are filing out of the library, no one really looks out of place. And then, like, half a dozen guards rush in, and, like, one assumes they go find the body and they do a sweep and stuff. Yrene then explains to, like, Hafiza and the head librarian and everybody what happened, and the acolytes stay with her because she's terrified, which, obviously.
Yeah.
So we go back to Empire of Storms now, chapters 14 to 16, and we're in Aedion's point of view, and he's watching Aelin scale the temple, and he thinks they have passage on a boat tomorrow. Publicly, they're leaving at noon, but they're actually also going on a different boat instead that's leaving at dawn. So,
yeah,
anybody that sees them thinks they're leaving at noon, which...
Yeah, they've publicly booked passage and bought tickets for noon, but then they've privately, like, bribed a captain to let them, like, sneak onto his boat at dawn and leave early. So, like, it's all a ruse.
Yeah. So I guess the captain of that ship actually told them that his merchant brother saw about 50 warships readying to sail over from Wendelin. and he obviously didn't know if they are, like, rallying to fight for or against them. So, Wendelin, that means their Maeve's armada is getting ready. So, what are they gonna do?
Yeah, Maeve is sort of the wild card right now, we'll say.
Yeah.
Because, like, I will say, though, about Maeve, so, like, she hasn't, like, I know that in our heads, she's a bad person. Right? Like, as everything that happened in Air of Fire, like, you know, how she treats her cadre, and, like, you know, she's a bit bitchy.
Yeah.
However, we still don't automatically assume that she's evil.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, she's still a ruler of Doranel, of Wendelin, like, so we sort of don't know yet, is she gonna be evil, or is she gonna come through?
Yeah, because, like, it seems like she doesn't like the Valg, from what we've learned from her. Like, she doesn't want them to take over either. So, like, one would assume she's not gonna ally with them, but obviously we don't know.
Yeah.
Aedion's kind of thinking to himself, like, they can't fight both of them if they are allied. Like, if Erawan and Maeve ally together, they would likely just destroy this world. Like, it's not ideal.
Yeah.
Lysandra, like, pops up behind him in her human form, and she says that Aelin is accepting Darrow's decree too calmly, and that, like, this is the calm before the storm. And Aedion just kind of has a thought that, like, earlier today, Lysandra was reading a book called Forgotten Creatures of the Deep. And I'm like, I missed that the first time I read it, but it's just, like, part of the foreshadowing.
Yeah. It's important.
Yeah.
But then it's funny, because Aedion just, like, laughs it off. He's like, haha.
Yeah.
Look at the book she's reading.
Basically. Lysandra then says to him, like, this can't all be a coincidence. Aelin and Dorian have, like, so much power right now each. And Erawan is coming back at the exact same time. Like, there's no way that's coincidental. Something has to be up. And then she says, like, Mala and Diana are watching over Aelin and have been forever. So Lysandra kind of wonders if they're waiting to unleash her and what the cost will be. So it's just like, Lysandra's kind of like putting shit together, it seems like.
Before anyone else.
Yeah. But she's also talking to Aedion, who is like the least putting shit together person there is. Like, he's very good at strategizing in war, but like, he's not...
He's not a puzzler.
No, he's not the one to have this conversation with. She also says, like, they haven't seen all of Erawan's power, but she thinks they haven't seen all of Aelin's power either. And Aedion is just like, she's not an unwilling pawn in this. Like, he says he'll defy the gods if he needs to, like, he just gets kind of defensive and doesn't actually think things through.
Yeah. But, like, it's true. Why has he waited so long to make a move?
Yeah. Don't know.
And, like, if he so easily overtook Terrassen, Fenharrow, Ilway, like, all these places, why does he need all of these, like, crazy evil creatures from Morath? Like, he did that 10 years ago just with regular soldiers that were, like, probably some of them might have been valg infested, but, like, it just seems weird that he felt like he needed to spend 10 years coming up with creatures to create this unstoppable force. But, like, it seemed like he was decently unstoppable before if he managed to overtake, like, half the continent.
Yeah. Just waiting for Aelin to be old enough to fight him. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
And, like, why would you want to wait for the one person that can destroy you? Why would you want to wait for them to become of age? Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And I guess that was the point of why he attacked Terrassen and tried to kill her so that she wouldn't come of age and be able to destroy him. But, like, I don't know. It just seems a bit suspect.
Yeah, it's something.
Yeah.
So yeah, Aedion and Lysandra kind of like tease each other a bit, and they kind of flirt a bit, but he thinks that there are lines that he doesn't want to cross yet. And he thinks, like, she's been through so much. Mm-hmm. And he also thinks, like, he was forced to do a lot in the beginning, I guess after Terrassen was taken over, too, that he doesn't really want to talk about. But he does think, like, flirting with her is harmless, though. So, they both have a lot of trauma. Mm-hmm. He also thinks of, like, how much Lysandra loves Evangeline, and, like, it's unconditional love. And then he thinks of Aelin and Rowan, and he wonders if he'll ever feel that love someday. And it's just one of those moments where, like, you're jumping to a different topic, and you're like, this is foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Like, abrupt change. He even thinks to himself that sometimes he's jealous of Rowan and Aelin, but he loves Aelin, but he can't imagine marrying her, like Darrow kind of implied. He's like, that's not anything that he'd ever be able to do. It's, like, repulses him. But then Aelin sparks some blue sparkies, and it's a signal. So Lysandra shifts into a snow leopard and roars, and the soldiers come out of the temple, and Aelin jumps down, and Aedion and Lysandra, like, come on either side of her. And they take down their hoods, and people gasp because her hand is covered in fire. And she says, get the hell out of my temple. And then she, like, makes a fire crown for her head so that everyone knows who she is. It's like her big reveal. Aedion then says, my lady gives you a choice. Leave now or never. And he draws, like, the Sword of Orinth, which is meaningful, too. Mm-hmm. So some of the soldiers back away, but a human commander calls those soldiers cowards. And he's like, the Wolf of the North and the fire-breathing bitch queen herself. Because, of course. And then he calls Aelin's power parlor tricks. But some of the soldiers do run away, and about 35 stay. And the commander says to show them what she's got, because he has a lovely farmer's daughter to finish. And we're like, we have to make the villains so evil and so bad. I just don't think that was necessary, but yeah. Okay. So Aelin blows like she's blowing out a candle, and the commander freezes, and then, like, a breeze comes and disperses him into ashes. So she literally just, like, burnt him from the inside out.
I love it.
Yeah, me too. And she just says, I warned you. And a few more soldiers bolt, but most of them just stay. And
Which
then
is stupid.
So stupid.
Like, if she can do that to one dude just standing there, I would be out of there.
Well, yeah.
Actually, I'd be like, do you need help? Like,
yeah.
Do you want... I'll join you.
Yeah. Please take me in.
Please take me.
So the three of them basically unleash themselves, and they take back the temple in, like, no time, and the soldiers either died or the townspeople who joined into the fight hauled them away to, like, put them in prison kind of thing. Aelin then, like, cleanses the temple with fire to get rid of all the garbage and all of the shit inside, and she circles it with flame so no one can get in other than them. We go over to her point of view now, and she tells Aedion and Lysandra that she needs a minute alone, and she kind of thinks, like, Aedion fought beautifully, and we get that Lysandra is currently looking at a sea dragon carving on the temple, so that's interesting.
Yes, so again, more references.
Yes.
Because, like, why would we reference the Mycenians and the sea dragon, and how the Mycenians will come back when the sea dragon appears, and we have a shapeshifter, and she's studying a sea dragon picture. Like, it's just like, let's put together some dots, people.
What's gonna happen?
Yeah. She doesn't mention shit for no reason.
No. So Aelin ends up going to the sacred center of the temple where that giant black rock is, and she puts out all of the candles except for the one that's in the rock, and she looks around for any sign of why she was asked to come here, and she can't see anything, so she actually, like, steps up on the rock, which I'm sure you're, like, not supposed to do. It's definitely sacrilegious. She also pulls her word key out, and King Brannon shows up, and he's kind of, like, amused by her, and I kind of love their banter in the beginning. It's kind of cute.
But also, like, he's a ghost, and she's just like, oh, hey.
Yeah. I just love it.
It's like, I'm not surprised. And I know she's had conversations with Elena, so, like, it's not as shocking.
Yeah.
But still, it's just funny that she's like, I was wondering when you'd show up.
Yeah. So she actually is like, I know you want something, but she has some questions first, so he lets her go ahead. And she asks about Maeve. She asks if she can be killed. And he says she's old, and he isn't sure if she can be killed. He says, like, all Fae can be killed, but she's actually outlived all of the Fae that he knows of, basically. Like, she's the oldest of them all.
Well, and he's been dead for, what, like 1,000 years? Yeah. And, like, she was old when he was around. So, like, he's like, I have no idea what's going on with her.
Yeah, it's wild. And he also says, like, no one understands her power. So, like, is she even Fae? And that's kind of what Aelin thinks then. But he says, like, she does fear their flame, which is good. And Aelin asks if she's valg. But Brannon laughs and says no. We're like, cool, we got that answer. G2G. So she then asks, like, she's like, cool, that's good enough for me. And she says, she asks him if, like, their power gets any easier. And he says yes and no. He says, like, it gets easier to deal with the power, but relationships get harder. And they burn with the fire in their souls. So, like, I think it's more, like, kind of when Chaol was being dickish and, like, people don't like when other people have unchecked power and shit. So that part is definitely hard. He then sees that she has Goldrin, the sword, on her back, and he asks if the beast in the cave is dead, but she just says, nope, but he is lonely. And Brannon says that they would have had fun together, which I love. Yeah. I love their banter. Yeah.
And I love that. So he's sort of, like, sarcastic the way she is, and she's just like, geez, if only your daughter was like you. And, like, sort of poking fun at the fact that his daughter is, like, really serious and, like...
Yeah. And, like, that's what she says next, and she's like, I wish they sent you and not your daughter. It must skip a generation, the sarcasm and badassery. And then he's just, like, done with her. And he's like, no, you can't make jokes about my daughter. And we're like, oh, shit. So, he gets to the business, and he tells her the lock to bind the keys permanently into the word gate is hidden in the stone marshes. And she tries to ask, like, where in the stone marshes? What lock? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? But he just disappears. And she's like, God damn it. So she stands up and she looks out to sea towards Wendelin, and she sticks her tongue out to, like, where Maeve would be, which I just love. Aedion pops up, and she's like, oh, you were just listening to everything? And he's like, yep, we knew you had other plans for being here, and apparently, like, Brannon winked at him before he left, so he even knew that Aedion was there.
Right. And I'm surprised, actually, that Aelin didn't, like...
realize?
Yeah.
Yeah. True. She tells him, though, that, like, allies are still the goal, not cryptic messages from dead royals. And then, like, Hawk Lysandra shows up, too. And Aedion asks Aelin to stop keeping so many secrets to herself. I'm sure that's gonna happen.
Sure.
But they're interrupted because they hear footsteps and they smell valg. And they think, like, this person had to walk through the fire around the temple to get in. So, like, it can't just be, like, a regular
random
grunt.
Yeah.
Like, it's got to be something more. So, a man comes up to them, and it's actually the chief overseer of Endovir. So, Aelin realizes, like, Erawan knows her past as well. He knows that she's Selena. He knows that, like, she was in the mines. Like, he knows everything now. She thinks, like, she still has nightmares about this guy, and he is actually an evil person. Like, he enjoyed Endovir. He was a monster there. He liked punishing people.
Right.
So he's not just, like, I don't know, he wasn't just doing a job. He enjoyed it. So he asks her to introduce him and calls her slave, and Aedion just, like, stands in front of her and kind of realizes what's going on.
Yeah.
And she's, like, trying to muster up her confidence, but she is struggling. And she asks why he's here. And the amulet that she's wearing kind of grumbles, but she ignores it because she's like, if anybody figures out what it is, Erawan could easily come get it and then have all three, and then we're all fucked.
Only he doesn't have all three.
No, he doesn't have the second one because we know where that one is.
Yeah. But they don't know that.
No, unfortunately. So he goes to speak, but she just sends fire down his throat and ears and nose and everywhere. Like, anywhere she can put fire, she throws it in.
Any orifice.
Exactly.
Ah.
But there's nothing really inside of him. And she pulls back and she's nauseous. And she realizes, like, his heart is made of iron and wordstone. Which is just, like, wild.
Yeah, and it's like a magic repellent.
Yeah. Yeah, because iron is not...
It's not good for Fae.
So he says that he was actually planted here for her to see what awaits them if they visit Morath. And she just, like, attacks again and again and again, and she ends up vomiting, and she ends up burning off all of his clothes, but, like, his skin is still fine. Then his heart, like, starts pulsing and ends up punching through his body, which seems wild.
Yeah.
And there's nothing inside of him. Like, there's no blood, there's no guts. It's just, like, this stone iron thing that has two eyes in it now. And Aelin just says, at least you know how to make a good entrance, Erawan. So it's Erawan's eyes. I guess he can see through this thing somehow. And a new voice starts, and, like, she knows it's not the Duke's voice, but it is definitely Erawan's. And he's saying, like, he expects gratitude. And she knows she thinks of the amulet again, and she's like, shit, like, he really can't figure out that this is here. So she asks why he thinks he should have gratitude, and he says, for the small warning present, for ridding the world of one more vermin, and for making her realize how fruitless standing against him will be. And he kind of speaks, like, in their heads, but, like, all of them, and it's just, like, icky. Mm-hmm. And she ends up, like, lashing out with her magic. And he says, like, he's surprised she tried to save the guy first. Because, like, she tried to burn out the valg. Yeah. That's generally what she does. And I guess it would have saved him. So he's just like...
I'm surprised you did it, considering you hate this guy's guts.
Exactly. She should have just chopped his head off. And he even says, like... the guy is so vile that his prince struggled being in his head, which is, like, that seems severe. Unimaginable.
Yeah.
He then asks if she enjoys deciding who lives and dies and being like a god, which is, like, kind of a theme in these books. Aedion says he figured he'd have better things to do than taunt them, and asks if this is because Dorian slipped through his nets. And he says, Erawan says that he has plans for the would-be king and his rescuer, Rowan Whitethorn of Dornell. And he's currently has people searching for them. And when he finds them, he's going to hone them into his weapons. And Aelin just, like, attacks again with, like, the hottest fire she has, and she looks over to Lysandra for a second, who is in human form next to them. And while she's distracted, Erawan strikes out with his magic, and it hits her chest, and it's, like, immediate agony and darkness and pain, and Aedion has to, like, drag her to her feet, and she has to lean against him. And she throws her magic out again, and eventually the body rips apart, but she knows it's only when Erawan decides to, like, disconnect and leave and his eyes disappear that she's able to destroy the body.
Yeah.
And she realizes then, like, this was him showing her that death is the only option for her court, the only mercy that she's able to give them, because if he gets his hands on any of them, he's going to do that to them, and, like, they're fucked. So she knows that they need to get to Skull's Bay immediately and get to Rowan and Dorian. And Aelin looks down and she notices that Erawan missed hitting the amulet by 3 inches. And, like, if he had hit it, he probably would have realized that there was something there.
Yeah.
Which would have been bad.
Yeah, and it's just, like, it's just wild that, like, he wasn't even in his proper form, and they could do nothing to him.
Yeah. And, like, he hurt her so much with his magic that
just
was, like,
one little boop
through a different vessel and, like, traveled, like, I don't even understand it, but yeah. Wild.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that wraps it up for this week. If you want to get in touch with us and share your thoughts on anything you heard in any of our episodes, or if you have any book suggestions, please reach out to us by email at coffeeandcoread@gmail.com or on Instagram or Facebook at coffeeandcoread and coffee.coread on TikTok.
Yeah, so next week in our tandem read, we will be reading Tower of Dawn, chapter 11 to 17, and Empire of Storms, chapter 17 to 23. So, make sure to follow along. And if you're enjoying our chats, don't forget to follow, rate, and review wherever you get our content. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you on the next page.